So welcome guys, it's Andy and Lewis here from D6 Evolution.
Hi guys.
So today we're going to be talking about secondary objectives and how to choose them in ninth edition of 40k.
Absolutely. That's my first video of ninth edition. Super excited to be talking about how to play the mission and list building to that effect as well. And I think ninth edition is a very different play field for how you're going to build your army and play the mission. So I'm really excited to be talking about this.
Yeah. So I think after looking through all the rules, essentially the rules are pretty much the same as 8th edition, but the big changes are the missions, aren't they? And I think the
100%.
thing which a lot of people are struggling with is what secondaries do you choose? So in this video, we're going to go over some generic advice on how you build your army to achieve your secondaries,
Mhm.
and of course, what secondaries to take, which ones are good secondaries to choose routinely, and which ones are traps.
Absolutely. And to that effect, I think Andy's put together a very good document, which we'll put obviously in the show notes. I definitely use this. I've had a look when I've been playing a couple of games myself, and it's a nice little cheat sheet. And it's lovely color coded and it's nice design. So yeah, I'd take some time with it, read through it, and we're going to be going through that now.
Yeah, and what I would say about the document, obviously, is that you know, ninth edition's just come out. Obviously, we get the books a little bit early, but we've not had many games of it yet. So
No.
please comment below. Let us know what you think. If you think I'm completely wrong and there's Slay the Warlord is the best objective that there ever is, then write it down below. Let me know. We want this to be a community thing. So if
Yeah.
you think we've missed something, please do
Yeah.
actually comment.
And we'll update the document accordingly. And bear in mind, we were just taking our first take on this, having just come hot off the press, and we're having a look at it and making our first judgments. But I'm sure as we play more games, that feeling will change. You guys will have some different experiences from us right off the bat. So we're all on a learning experience here. It was a wonderful time at the beginning of eighth, when everyone was just playing crazy lists and trying to figure out what works. And it's really exciting to be back in that kind of time frame again.
Yeah, and I think I think the mission set is so completely different to eighth, isn't it? So it's just
Yeah.
coming into this with an open mindset.
Yeah, actually, it's not as different as it was at the very beginning of eighth, and I think it's very funny that me and you were discussing our absolute skew list that comes straight off the bat in our mind of what we think's good, and they're very similar to what we were playing in Index eighth. Funnily enough, you're talking about Custodes jet bikes, and I'm talking about Nurglings, and it's been 3-4 years, and we're back there again with a different mission set. But you remember at the beginning of eighth, it was just Eternal War missions. It was end game objectives, a lot of based on the points of holding objectives, and it was not far off that with the beginning of ninth as well.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive right in. Let's talk about list construction to start with.
Yeah.
And what I would say is when you're constructing lists, yes, you are going to tailor slightly to what secondaries you're going to take. And obviously that's what this video is about. But remember, primary objective is king in ninth edition.
Yeah.
That's how you're going to win the mission. The
Yeah.
secondaries are just going to help you along the way. So when you're doing your army construction, think about how you're going to contest the primary objective.
Yeah.
And you're going to do that in two different ways. Number one, you're going to be survivable. You're going
Mm-hmm.
to be a board control army, which is survivable
Mm-hmm.
because you've got to stay on that objective for an entire battle round. And
Mm-hmm.
second of all, you've got to be able to interact with your opponent and be
Mm-hmm.
able to take them off objectives.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
that's fast moving obsec units, or it's being super killy to get them off
Mm-hmm.
objectives.
Yeah. No, I'd say those are the principles. And if you're starting out, they're good places to start. But you can always skew lists in different ways to achieve similar goals.
Yeah.
There is certainly something to be said for just mass numbers of units where you're not particularly durable, but you've got 100 3-man units, 5-man units, and you throw one onto an objective, then it dies. Next turn you throw it on another objective. So there is plenty of ways to skew lists and still achieve the goal. But you've got to be thinking primaries, the 45 points. You've got to make sure you're scoring as much of that as you can, if not maxing that, and then secondaries come into play after
Yeah.
that.
So let's get on to the main focus. Let's talk about choosing secondaries.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were talking about this, we thought that when you're designing your army, you should have your secondaries in mind. And particularly, you should probably have two secondaries in mind,
Yep.
which you could consistently do.
Mm-hmm. Well, we said this in 8th edition as well, to be fair, when ITC became very prevalent towards the latter part of 8th edition, where we're saying, there's 3 secondaries you pick there, very similar to how it is in 9th. They've obviously picked a little bit out of Frontline
Yep.
Gaming's pocket for that. And it was always the case where we're saying, you should have 2 that are, your army's built around, you could definitely do, or maybe 1 you pick up on the fly, maybe 2 killies, 1 hold, whatever you want to do. You really should be skewing your list to be able to achieve those secondaries. I would say the big market difference between 9th ninth and the ITC at the end of eighth was that secondaries were generally pretty easy to do. You would mostly score almost all of your secondaries. I mean, I went for a big period of eighth edition where I was like maxing out secondaries almost every game, maybe dropping one or two at most. Whereas in ninth edition, with the new set from GW, it is hard to score secondaries. It really is hard. So you're scrambling for every single point. And overall, just to give you a flavour for them, if you haven't really read through them or played much, there are ones that are very easy to do, but then they won't let you max score. And so obviously you have a maximum that you can reach. And there are ones that are hard to do, very hard to do, but they will let you max score. So finding that finite balance in your list building and your secondary choices that allow you to score as much or as close to maximum points as possible is going to be really hard. First time I read through it, I honestly thought, oh, well, that one's rubbish. It's going to be impossible hard to score. Oh, that one's rubbish because it's too low. And I got to the end of them and went, oh, no, that's all of them. They are all either really hard or don't let you max. I love it. I think it's a really good tactic from GW. I think there's still some problems with it, and I'm sure some FAQs will pick it up. But overall, it's it's a nice set of pushing you to try and achieve things that are quite difficult and decisions you have to make off the back of that.
Yeah, I think there's some rules you should think about when you're choosing your secondaries, and I think for me the first thing is choose a secondary which will help you achieve your primary mission is number one. So if you look at domination, for example, which we'll cover a bit more in detail later on, it's effectively it rewards you for being on multiple objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's fantastic because that's the primary mission.
So you're doing two with one stone. If you're scoring your primary, scoring secondary, the
And
only
you're
problem
helping
with
to
that.
Yeah, and you're denying your opponent primary points by being on multiple objectives. So you're
Absolutely.
doubling down on what you need to do.
Yeah. Now the only problem with that is if you don't succeed in what you need to do because someone else is better at it because they are also trying to score that primary, then it does make it difficult because you fall behind very very quickly. It's a bit of an all or nothing. And if you're a sort of middle tables player and you're trying to get to those upper echelons, you're not going to max score every game. So it's nice to have a spread where you can score points in different places and hopefully still position well in the tournament. But in principle, you want to be looking to try and max score. That's how you should be on your list if you want to succeed.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not just scoring domination. It's actually if you're a Blood Angels player and you're going to be in your opponent's table, it's just going to be, can I get behind enemy lines each turn?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to reward yourself
Yep.
with being in
Yep.
your opponent's deployment zone.
Yeah.
Is it actually going to be, I'm against Imperial Knights, so I'm going to take Titan Slayers because I need to kill Imperial Knights anyway?
Yeah. Yeah.
So something which is part of the primary mission, something which is part of your game plan regardless, they're the secondaries that you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't want to be going out of your way to do secondaries.
No. You always want to be doing two birds with one stone because it's about efficiency. Every time we talk about a combo, every time we talk about a list building, it's all about trying to find things where 1 and 1 equals 4 instead of 2. So if you're going to sit on that objective, get it for banners, raise the banners, get it for the objective, get it for hold more, and maybe another secondary as well. And all of a sudden holding that one objective is worth 3, 4, 5 points to you rather than just one and then trying to do something else at the same time. Because there's only a limited number of actions you can do. And
Exactly.
just one final comment on that. For me, one of the big changes in 9th edition is the speed at which the game has to be played now, because they've reduced it down to 5 turns, which we already moved from sort of 6 or 7, depending on how you rolled, down to 6 of ITC, and now we're gone down to 5. It's quite significant. If you've been playing for a long time, it does feel like a lot shorter game. And there's only so much you can do in 5 turns. You can only move a model 5 times. That model can only shoot 5 times. Maybe with some stratagems you can do more. But once you realize that, there is such a constraint on the ability of what you can do in the game, that you're not going to be able to score as much as you think you can because you'll run out of turns. And it's really important for armies like the standard gun line that was so prevalent for Nave. So many armies were building that, where they would blow you off the table in turn 2, maybe turn 3, and then they score all the objectives turn 4, 5, 6. Well, now they blow you all off the table turn 2, maybe turn 3, and they've got 2 turns to try and get all those objectives. It's like if they fall behind on the primaries after 3 turns, they're not going to be able to catch them back up by the end of the game. So it puts a massive swing in favour of other lists. And it's really important to consider that when you're looking at these objectives. It is a shorter game, it is a more constrained game, the map's smaller, and there's only so many turns you can achieve the goals.
Yeah. I think that's very, very important point, particularly when you can't even score your primary on turn one. So
Yeah,
it's four turns, four
yeah,
turns of scoring,
exactly. You
5
know,
turns for your secondaries.
and if
Um,
you just a comment at that, if you can build a list that is going to score maximum primaries in 3 turns and completely deny your opponent's list, I haven't figured anything out there yet, but just an example, something like the World Killer strat for Black Legion. I can't make a list around it. I can't seem to make it work. But the fact that that would deny their points. If you can stop them scoring for 3 points, they can't win the game. So
yeah,
for 3 turns, they wouldn't be able to win the game because there isn't enough primaries in turn 4 and 5 for them to catch up on what they've lost turn 1, 2, and 3. And as long as you kind of even out as secondaries, you don't even need to score all of them. You've already won the game. And when you suddenly realise things like that, it completely turns it on its head. It's a very different game at 9th edition to 8th, just on the mission pack.
yeah. So other things when you're choosing secondaries, I would be very wary of not having redundancy in your army to choose them. So
Mm-hmm.
I've been seeing comments online like, I'll take a psyker so I can do some of the psyker ones. I'll take an inquisitor.
Yeah,
Worst idea you could possibly have is have one model which can do one objective.
yeah,
That's terrible. Or I'll have one infantry unit so I can raise the banners.
yeah, yeah.
Just awful. Um,
And the reason
because
for
as soon
that,
as your opponent kills that one unit, you can't do that secondary. You'll score 0 points.
yeah,
And your opponent will literally like suicide a flyer into it or a smash
mm,
captain. Just as soon as you take that one unit out of the game, that's you. And it's
yeah,
important that you identify when your opponent's doing that as well, putting all
yeah.
their eggs in one basket.
I made a comment to you, Andy, when we got the rule book just before release, and we were kind of reading through these missions on the first edition of them before the Champions Pack came out, or Tournament Pack, whatever they're calling it. And I was looking at it, I was saying, like, for me, this is the edition that's really going to sort out the really good players in terms of strategic thinkers and critical problem solvers and that from people like net listers, for example. In 8th edition, and this was really bad in 7th, but particularly in 8th edition, it was who could blue each other off the table. Like, you would just play one of the net lists, and it was all about writing lists that just comboed damage to put out an insane efficiency on units. So you put something on the table and it just kills 5 units in 1 turn, because once you've done that, then you can score all the objectives because it's really easy, your opponent's lost. In 9th edition, because of being able to put stuff in strategic reserve, and because there's no points for killing anything and it's just holding it, the person who can outthink the opponent and counter their ability to score points is what's going to win the game, because ultimately all that matters is there's the points on the board at the end of it. So for example, if you come up against someone and they're playing and they take the I don't know, pierce the veil, or one of the psychic ones, like the psychic ritual, for example, which I think is going to be quite prevalent, and they've got one psyker. If you come up to them and go, okay, well, rather than play my game now, which maybe my game was to sit and hold objectives in backfield or whatever, normally I'd play that secondary game. If you can identify that that's the way that your opponent's going to lose, not the way that you're going to win, and you put everything, maybe just suicide your most expensive unit into doing that, all of a sudden they've lost 15 points. And it is incredibly hard to come back if you can kind of match them like for like on other places if they're down 15 points. So what will sort the wheat for the chaff for the good and the bad players are people who will perhaps forego some of their strategy to realize what that's going to do to their opponent. Whereas in 8th edition, because there's kill more, hold more, so many different things going on in the game, and a little bit of a diminishment here is countered by something else here, and it kind of balances out. With now, it's going to be, in my mind, very much skew-less, looking to achieve something specifically, or looking to punish an opponent who's picked something that allows them to score the points, because it's a very different point structure. So
Yeah.
it's going to be interesting, and it means you really need to be on your toes. It's not about the tips and tricks videos that we used to do. How do you wrap a unit? How do you do some quirky combo? Because they're really trying to kill that, and it's going to be everything about how you're more strategic with your play. How do you know when to bring in turns in? When do you know to reserve units, and how you play around that? It's a new world of playing Warhammer, I think, competitively anyway.
Yeah. Um, and I think this brings me on nicely to my last point is beware what secondaries you take and how your opponent can interact with those secondaries.
That's the comment there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said with that. And if you can eliminate your opponent by like killing their one psyker, that's a huge psychological edge
Yep.
that you gain over your opponent. And we're going to be talking a lot more about how specifically some of the secondaries they can be interacted with when we go through them individually later on in the video.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll come on to those points specifically and use anecdotes against the missions themselves, because it makes more sense when we're
Yeah.
talking about it like that.
The last thing I want to quickly talk about is putting tools in your list which will help you interact with your opponent.
Hmm.
So even if it's like, I've been looking a lot more like at just having some guardsmen in my list again, just to fly out across the board.
Yeah.
Um, so that they can quickly just sit on all the objectives. They'll never survive the next battle round, but it stops your opponent scoring the primary mission.
Yep.
It If they've taken secondary objectives where there's got to be no units near the objective for them to start activating,
Hmm.
again, you can completely mess up their entire turn just by doing that.
Yep. Yep.
Um, there's a great one where you've got to have no units within 6 inches of the middle of the board to start scoring it at the start of your turn. So you just fire up a unit of guardsmen each turn.
Suicide it. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't care. It's 10 guardsmen. You don't. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
at all.
I did.
Other
I did.
things. Other things to think about: snipers.
Mhm,
Fantastic.
mhm,
If they're planning on sticking a psyker in the middle of the board and just scoring points each turn,
mhm,
or having lots of psychic denies in your army, there's ways to have it. There's stratagems. Sometimes there's relics, there's warlord traits you can take.
mhm,
And I think another really interesting thing is movement in your opponent's turn.
mhm,
So just speaking about custodies for a second here, they've got multiple ways of doing this. You've got your heroic intervention stratagems you can do. You've got
mhm,
stooping dive to charge in their turn. And there's a cool little trait with a shield captain where he can consolidate 3+D3 in any direction.
mhm.
So you can quickly move on to objectives or
Yeah.
move where you need to be.
Yeah, and later on in the game as well, when they think they've got later on in the phase of the turn, when they think they've got something set up for their next turn, so maybe they've fought and piled in, and then you fight with that character next, and all of a sudden he's on the objective. I think, oh damn, I was gonna score that, but then now you're moved on it. So movement in later phases is, things like
Yeah.
that are really big.
And another thing which I think is very interesting is fight when dying. So like the banner abilities. So I used
Hmm.
to use it on Centurions, and people would think that they'd stand like a unit of scouts on an objective. One of my Centurions would die, and I'd turn around and shoot that unit off the objective. So you're not scoring that objective point, but
Yeah,
suddenly when it comes to your turn,
yeah,
you're now scoring hold more because you've
yeah,
shot them off an objective,
yeah,
and you're on a certain amount of objectives yourself.
yeah,
So I think
yeah,
things like that are really interesting in the game, and suddenly
yeah.
they're not scoring their domination points anymore.
Yeah, I would say to that effect though, make sure you are incredibly familiar with what point of the game things happen, and that's in terms of when an action starts and when it ends. When a point is scored, is it at the end of your turn? Is it at the end of your movement phase? Is it in your command phase? Because there is a real smorgasbord of things like that. I mean, it used to be the case, obviously, at the end of the turn, you score more, you hold more, and then it's your secondaries. Whereas now it's like some of these will be scored at the beginning of your turn, some of them are scored at the end of your turn, some you can just move on and do, some you have to sit there for a turn. And really knowing that, knowing what your opponent has to do, allows you to think, a few moves ahead, or see what they're planning on doing because they're moving out there, and then counter it. And I think it's really interesting. It gives you a chance to counterplay your opponent, but you have to be familiar with all of the stratagems. So make sure when you're playing your practice games, you do just try everyone out, and you try it a couple of times. You'll make mistakes, you'll forget things. The first time I played Raise the Banners, I completely played it wrong. I just misread what it was, and I thought, oh, it's a terrible one. Like, how can you score this? You got to hold it, and you got to hold it every turn. I thought, and it was. But then I suddenly realised, oh, actually, it's not how it works. So it's just practice makes perfect. So just make sure you try each one. You know them. When your opponent takes them, you know exactly what they're trying to do, and not having to read and go, oh, when do you score that? Do you do that now?
Yeah,
You're just gonna lose.
yeah. I'd
Lots of
actually
them.
put more attention into what your opponent's secondaries are than your own.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because that's how
Okay,
they're going to win the game. Yeah,
so
let's go.
let's dive straight into this. So
Hmm.
anyone who doesn't know that the secondaries are all broken down into different categories, and you can take one from each category. So you couldn't take assassinate and Titan hunters,
Yeah.
for example. So first one's battlefield supremacy. So this is all about holding objectives. So this is generally what you're doing with your primary mission as well. So
Hmm.
these ones are quite good to take.
Yeah.
Um, so first one, engage on all fronts. So this is the old recon.
To an extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just slightly improved because you get 2 points for holding 3 quarters and 3 points for holding all 4 quarters. So that gives you a chance to score even when you previously might not have scored because you weren't holding all the quarters. But this is straight away. This is one of the ones that I have to note. I thought, well, fantastic. Obviously, it's recon. I'm so used to playing recon, mostly, especially playing MSU these days. Almost everyone's going to take it. And I was like, and it's great. You can max score it. But then I thought, in order to max score it, you have to have a model in every single quarter of every single turn for the entire game. there isn't one opportunity to muck that up because then you don't get max points. So I was like, oh, well, maybe it's not that good. Maybe this one's easier to score. No, they're all like that. So, this is actually a really good one because even if you do it for 4 turns instead of 5 turns, you're still scoring 12 points. So there's still a good way to score even if you don't completely succeed it. So overall, it's a really good one. But bear in mind, it's still hard. Every single table quarter from the start of the game to the end of the game, and thinking about your opponent, if they're playing well against you, then they'll notice that you've got that, and all they need to do is go, okay, so he's moving to, like, so he's got one squad of Nurglings in that table quarter, and it's unlikely that any rest of his units are going to get over there next turn. Well, I have to kill that squad. I wouldn't normally, I wouldn't bother. It's not an objective, it's not doing anything, but that's 3 points if I kill that. And then all of a sudden it pulls his army in places he doesn't want to be. So it's really hard to max that, I think, because it's very easy for your opponent to play well against you in killing the units that would be there.
Mm.
And just on that point as well, you then think, well, you strategic reserves all day long, right? I don't need to have a squad of Nurglings that can start out of my deployment zone. I don't need to have a flyer or some way to get to there really quickly. I'll just put tactical marines or plague marines in strategic reserve and bring them out, and I'll be like, okay, depending on what table map you're playing on, I can relatively well screen out my deployment zone and 2 board edges, and all of a sudden you thinking you're going to bring a strategic reserve in on one of my table quarters. If I can screen it well enough, you can't. And all of a sudden you don't score that 3 points for that turn. If I can do that for 2 or 3 turns, you miss 6-9 points out. It's huge. So it's important to to realize that your opponent can counterplay even recon.
But I think it is one to build your army around. And I think
Yep.
the other things to say is that flyers can score it. It's one of the only ones flyers can score.
Yep.
And like Lewis said, strategic reserves, reinforcements, they can all come in and score this because it's scored at the end of your movement phase, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't forget that people can screen, though. I mean, I wrote a number
small
of lists thinking,
boards,
yeah,
it's easy to screen now.
so much easier to screen these days, and people will be because people are taking strategic reserves all the time. So I think the tactic of screening was one of the forlorn qualities and skills that people had in 8th edition. I just don't think a lot of people did it. I remember I was playing like Don Houston's list with plague burst callers, and with 3 plague burst callers and 3 Derrideers and 3 flyers, I could zone out 70-80% of the board with those 9 models.
And that was with a big board.
Yeah, and that's on the 6x4 board, so it's not hard to do. You don't need to have a huge horde with like massive armies. You can do it with just individual MSU units just covering massive spaces. So don't think that you can just teleport in behind them and take line break or take recon. It's very easy to screen that out, and people would be doing it because it's points. So be careful of that.
Okay, let's move on because we've got a whole heap of these to get through.
Do.
Yeah. Let's quickly touch on domination because I like domination. Like I alluded to earlier, it's basically you have to control more than half of the objectives, but it's only at the end of your turn. So you can run out those suicidal guardsmen who have been they've been serving me well for an entire edition now. They're amazing, but you can do this with anything, and it's just about running fast obsec bodies and standing them near objectives.
Yep. No,
that's all you need to do for this.
And it's doubling down what you need to do, and your opponent can't stop it.
And then it stops your opponent scoring in his turn.
Yeah.
Because before, in his command phase, you hold more objectives, so he never gets that 5 points for that.
Yeah. So it's a huge one. I mean, you could definitely, but you should really start building your first 9th edition list taking domination. And it's a hard choice because I mean we just described that. I think line breaker is an easy one for a lot of lists, not every list, but if you're playing a melee list, if you're playing a blood angels list, or some kind of chaos in your face list, if you've got Nurglings, anything that you can do where you can start outside your deployment zone, or you can move in, it's an easy 4 points a turn. So you need to do that's a really great one because you need to do that for 4 turns. You're going to max it. So it's any one of those 3, I would say 95% of lists are going to take one of those 3, and they should. They're the easiest, the best.
And I think line break is one of these situational ones. If it's part of your plan, do it. If it's not part of your plan, just don't even think about it.
No. And but then again, don't think you're going to do a strategic reserves because that gives too much play to your opponent. Do it if you're playing 3 Hell Drakes, or your entire Khorne Berserker list in Rhinos, when you're only ever going to be there.
Yeah. Right, so let's talk about no mercy, no respite, and this is points for killing stuff.
Yeah,
which is great. There's not you don't get many points for killing things in 9th edition, but this is where you're going to get them. So grind them down is essentially I'll call it the old attrition because that's what it was in the rule book.
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah. Yeah.
essentially kill more, isn't it?
Butcher's bill. Yeah.
So I don't think you should. Basically, if you go second, this is a much easier objective to get
Yeah.
because you know how much you've got to kill in each battle round.
Yeah.
And the second thing is, if you've got a low model army, this is much easier to do. So if you've got custodies or something like that, this
Three
is much.
knights. If you're playing three knights, you're not. They're not going to kill two knights in a turn, and if they do, you've lost the game anyway. So
This is a go-to for something
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
I think the only funny thing you could do with grind them down actually is that if I took 30 or 40 guardsmen and someone takes this against me, I put them in reserve till turn 3.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely, because it just runs out of time for them to score it. That's exactly what we're talking about. This entire game now is doing stuff like that. The tips and tricks videos we'll be doing from here on out is just stuff like that. I don't even know whether we bother using models. We'll just explain
Yeah.
it because that's all it is. It's just going to be stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just putting your opponent on the back foot. The other
Yeah,
thing to say with grind them down is that if your opponent does have a lot of chaff units for you to kill, be disciplined about how you kill them. Because if you want to score kill more every single turn, say they've got 6 units of scouts. If you kill all 6 units turn 1, and then all they've got left is some sanguinary guard to get through, you're not going to get grind them down every turn,
yeah,
are you?
you've got to play it out. Yeah, you've got to give yourself. But you'd always do that with Bitches Bill before as well, and you get used to doing it. And I think the difference is now if you don't, because you don't have the kill more as a primary, you don't have to finish a unit. Before it would be like, oh, it's a 5-man unit of Cav-like warriors, and I've killed 4 of them. Oh, shoot that metal gun as the last one because I need to kill more. Blah blah blah. Whereas now you're like, well, I've got my Granby down already. I'll leave that one guy alone, and then whenever I want in later in the game, I can kill him. It doesn't matter. I don't need it for kill more. There's no relevance to that. So yeah, I think it's a good one. And if you're building a list, like a very killy list, and that's how you think you're going to win the game, it's a good one to go for because you're
Yeah.
probably going to get it, especially with a lot of MSU these days. I think that's going to be a good one for.
Yeah. Next one is thin their ranks.
Yeah,
Fairly
straight up.
simple.
Yeah,
If they've got more than 100 models, consider it more than 150, and you've got a way of killing them. You're
yeah.
clearly going to take it.
It's it's just
It's your basic anti-horde. I
it's
don't
the
think there's
same.
much more to say than that.
No, it's exactly the same as Reaper before. You
Yeah.
ask them how many models they've got. If they got 80 models, you're like, I'm taking Reaper, because you're going to do it. It's interesting that it does it on wounds as well. That does help against some stuff. But do you know what? I'd be surprised if you see many lists that you think that that's going to let you max score. I just think lists will be played in different ways these days. So, and if you do, you're probably taking grind them down anyway. So, anyway, we'll move on from there. The last one, oh my god, I thought this was the worst one ever when I first read it. This is while we stand, we fight. Do you want to just explain it, Andy, and then I'll tell you why I thought it's bad and now why I think it's
Yeah,
absolutely
we had a
amazing.
good chat about this one, didn't we? And then we started coming up with some amusing ideas.
Ridiculous
So you
list.
choose the 3 most expensive models in your army, and then if they survive the game, you get 5 points for each one of them. So I guess it's when you come up against an army and go, look, they're actually going to control most of the table, but they're not actually going to kill me. Lewis has brought 100 Nurglings against me. He's going to do absolutely nothing, but he's just going to plan on sitting there and not interacting with me. That's when you take this.
Yeah, if you think you're not going to die, I mean, the reason I thought it was bad is like every list is going to have some like 200-point model in it, right? It's or a minimum. I mean, most lists will probably have a 300 or 400-point unit in it, like because you have to have some kind of hammer to your anvil, like. So I was just thinking, oh, what you're going to take like 3 predators, and that's going to be things like they're going to die, whatever it is. Like, even playing a Defiler Plague Burst call, I'm like they'll kill the Plague Burst callers if they have to. Like if that's worth the points, they'll do it. And then I thought, oh my god, but strategic reserves, right? So I was like, if you design your entire list, and I'm thinking maybe a Gene Stealer cult list, or you mentioned the Nurglings there, where every single model in your army every single unit in your army isn't more than say 80
Sorry. It's
points.
just to clarify, it's the most expensive model,
Mm.
not unit.
Oh, yeah, oh, sorry, yeah. So be clear, yeah. So if you're thinking that, so like the most expensive model in your army is like a 60 or 70-point character, then you could basically, if you took 3 60 70-point characters, like say 3 Poxbringers, and then 90 Nurglings, then those 3 characters become the most expensive models in your army. And then what happens is at the start of the game, you put them into strategic reserve, you bring them out on turn 3 at the most difficult place for them to be, like the furthest away from any model where they're totally out of harm's reach, and you hide them for 2 turns, and then you've just max scored. And
Yeah,
that is a
and
list that
you,
you could
you get
skew.
bonus points if your opponent's taken assassinate against those characters, obviously.
Yeah, man. If you played it, so again, this is why I kind of feel maybe somebody is clever in Games Workshop. I don't know. Maybe it's just serendipity. But like, the Gene Stealer cult got hit heavy with the points, and everyone, I was like, why? They're so bad. And I'm thinking, they are so good for playing the mission. Like, you could bring those 3 characters out, then put them back into strategic reserve. So you deny your opponent assassinate, who may be baited into taking it, and you've max scored your points. You've just won the game. You've
Yeah, because you
literally
can put, because if they go into reserve after the game starts, then they come on turn 5.
That's a 30-point swing.
The other thing we thought it'd be really funny you could do this with, obviously you are losing a chunk of your force to do this. If you had like some cheap aircraft,
Yeah,
after turn 1, you just fly them off the board and they're in ongoing reserve. So then you bring them back turn 5.
yeah. I was thinking 3 Hellblades. I think they're about 150 points each now. So you bring them on in turn 3, and then you just bring them off in turn 4. And they got 1 turn to kill 3 Hellblades, and you can put them as far away from everything. It's 350 points. Oh, sorry, 450 points. But it's like, it may be worth it. I don't know. I mean, I've read these missions. And I'm like, you could skew your list so hard for these missions. When you see people play it like ETC and stuff before, it's always really skewed lists because the missions like determine that. And I feel like that's ninth edition at the moment. If I'm honest, I feel like without the kill and with the way that these missions are scored, I think you are going to see some stupid looking lists out there. I mean, I honestly think that one of the best lists out there is 90 plus Nurglings and a bunch of characters, just poxbringers. You start on every objective. And
Don't
you just don't
encourage
know.
people. Just stop it.
I'm just saying. But then on the flip side of that, you told me your jet bike list. I'm like, yeah, that's a massive skew list. It's just jet bikes. I could see jet bikes. I'm like, yeah, I could see that working as well. So I think we are going to be in the age of ridiculous looking lists when you turn up to a table.
But it's the start of every edition. Everyone's just trying to figure out what works.
Yeah. Maybe it is. I'm totally wrong. I probably
Okay.
am.
So I think this, while we stand, we fight, is going to be an interesting one to see whether it's just a total dud or actually people can actually figure a way to make it quite amusing lists around this.
You're right in your list. You're right in your list for that
Yeah.
objective. Otherwise, you don't take it.
Or unless you've just got an opponent who can't interact with you.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
Imperial Knights, I could see taking this if someone didn't bring enough anti-tank, you'd just be like, well, it's an easy 15 points at that
Well,
point.
if you play my Nurgling list, you're like, well, okay, whatever. My 3 most expensive units aren't dying, are they? You only got Nurglings, so I'll take that, and I'll score 15 points as well. So,
Yeah.
but then you won't score any primary. So, all right, let's go on.
Okay, so Purge the enemy. More killing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think Titan Hunters are fairly obvious. If someone's got a Titanic unit, even if they've got 1, that's a pretty easy 10 points if you've got a way of killing it.
Yeah, I actually took that in my first 9th edition game because the person I was playing against had a knight along with some chaos, and I was like, yeah, it's 10 points. Like, I don't think I can score 12 or 15 on any of the others reliably. I might be able to, but I can definitely kill that knight, and I'm definitely gonna. So 10 points, I'll take it. It's a good one, a very good one. Yeah, if you're stuck and they got it, you're gonna take it.
Yeah. Next one, bring it down. So this is all about killing vehicles or monsters.
Yeah.
So you need to max this. You need to kill 8 monsters or vehicles under 10 wounds or up to 10 wounds.
Yeah.
Or 5 if they're over 10 wounds.
Yeah.
So I actually think this is quite hard to do.
I'd make a comment here. So this is Big Game Hunter from before, in essence, basically.
But you've got to kill a lot more.
But you got to. I mean, before it was 3, wasn't it? Or yeah, it's 3, right? Or was it 4? I can't remember. So it's a lot more. I mean, killing those tanks, killing 3, 4 tanks is hard enough. I mean, you kind of always did it. I think it's 4. You kind of always do it, but now it's like you got to kill 5, and it's like, and if their opponents even bringing 5, like vehicles have got so much more expensive these days. They'll probably have like 4 vehicles, and you'll be like, I'm not going to kill 4 vehicles, and I don't even get max points.
And then let's face it, you're going to play against Lewis, and he's going to have 3 flyers, and he's going to flown them off the board and turn 5.
Exactly.
And he thought it was funny.
That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. This is what I'm saying. The tactics in list building and in strategic play is not about rolling the dice. It's not about where you move your models. It's about how you counterplay and outplay your opponent. So exciting for competitive players because you do exactly that. You're like, okay, I'm bringing this to bait you to bring it down, and then I'm going to fly around and then I'm going to fly off the board, and you're just not going to get your points.
Yeah. And then let's quickly touch on Assassinate, because I think this is the biggest one you can bait people in. It's like taking, dirt cheap commissars or Imperial Guard characters. Just take like 3 or 4 of them and
Yeah.
just wait for your opponent to do it. And it's probably less than 20 power level to put them all in reserve.
And you don't need them. Honestly, it's the standard question, isn't it? You come up to the table, how many vehicles have you got? How many characters have you got? And you're like, I've got no vehicles. I've got 6 characters. And they're like, I'm going to take assassinate. And you're like,
Good
oh
luck.
no, oh no, what will I do?
So I think there's obviously you've got to weigh up the balance of,
What you're
if,
giving up.
if you actually need this stuff, don't go and stick it in reserve all game.
Yeah, exactly.
Because remember, it's all about the primary still. You've got to contest that primary objective. If you flown a quarter of your army off the table.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's why I was saying those flyers, it's just too many points to do that with. But with 60, 70 point characters and you have 4 of them.
I think there's definitely something to be said for little guard characters, or I mean,
But you're skewing your list with less power, so there is a
yeah,
counter there. So now I think we've got to talk about this only briefly, because you could literally, well, you did rant on me for about an hour on it last
it
time we
is.
talked about this.
Oh, cut off the head.
Which was
This,
Slay the Warlord.
guys, just never ever take. This is Slay the Warlord, and this is probably one of the worst secondary objectives in 9th edition, if
No, it
not
is.
the worst.
There's
It
no
is the
probably
worst
about
objective.
it. It's hands down.
And I think it's really funny because it was almost like it was just part of the mission before. It's like, oh, Slay the Warlord. Yeah, it was brilliant. But it is now the worst thing you can possibly take. And I think it's mainly because there's so many different reasons why this is just so bad.
But you can't max score it. So straight away, I'm not that interested in it. If you can't max score, I wouldn't be interested in it. And then and then basically you're trying to kill one model that your opponent can strategic reserve, like we said. And then every turn that you don't kill it, it goes down in points that it's worth. So if you cut off the head, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put that character or that warlord, whoever it is, in strategic reserve, and I'm going to bring him out turn 3. And depending on whether I'm going to go first or second, you're going to score, is it 6 or 3 points? Yeah.
So if you kill it by the battle round 4, which is if you'd gone second and stuck it in reserve, then you get 3 points.
Yeah, if you can kill it that turn. And
Yeah,
when I bring it out
then,
strategic reserve, I'm going to bring it in the worst place for you to try and kill it.
I think if you bring it out turn
will
4, if you're on turn 4, you don't care about them getting 3 points at that point.
If it's a tight game and you're losing on the primaries because they've got a really good team, but it doesn't matter. Like you're gonna, you're weighed up at that point. It's long enough in the game. You know what the score is. You know whether that's a problem or not. You've got complete control over what that person scores. Anything where you give your opponent a chance to control your ability to score has always been bad in Warhammer, and it's particularly bad in 9th edition.
I think the only thing you could say maybe is that maybe you discourage your opponent from using their warlord aggressively.
Yeah.
If they've got a Blood Angel Smash Captain or something like that, maybe they don't throw him into turn 1.
But even so, you're only scoring a max. Well, if you go first, you're then scoring a maximum of 10, or if you go second, you're scoring a maximum of 6 because they go come out of deep strike, and that's if they come out of deep strike, go hell for leather into your face. I'm thinking maybe if they take some like Mortarion or Magnus or something like that, and you think you can kill him in 1 turn, and you go first, but you don't know if you're going to go first at that point. So you're even if you don't go first, you're not. There's no chance.
Okay.
There's
So
nothing good about
I was genuinely trying to think of a time when you would take this, and I thought actually, if your warlord, if your opponent's taking Imperial Knights, and then it's like, well, these warlords got to start on the table, and then I realized, well, if you're playing against Imperial Knights, you'd take Titan Hunters.
Which is in the same category, and you get in fact you got to kill it in the first turn to get 13 points. If they take one knight and that one knight is their warlord, and you're going first, and you hope that they don't pay 2 CP to put them on
and you didn't want to take Titan Hunters.
No. Anyway,
okay, so it gets worse from here. So there's specific armies you should never take this against, apart from our general advice of never taking this, and that is never take it against Custodes, and never take because they can do Shoulder the Mantle. So that if there's any Custodes in that army, another Custodes character will immediately, or another shield captain will just immediately take the warlord, become the warlord, and then you don't get the points.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure it's the same for Alpha Legion as well, isn't it?
Well, they have to take a warlord trait to let them do that, but just don't take it.
Just if there was a reason not to take it on top of not taking it, then
if you've taken it, you're just playing a casual game because you want to kill their warlord and you think it's thematic. That's all it's there for.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, we have to move on at this point. So, shadow operative. So this is all infantry-based action. Some of them are done by characters, and some of them are by non-characters. Yep. So it's important to remember which ones are which in this. So one of the best ones is raise the banners. Do you want to
Yep.
run through what that is, Lewis?
Yeah. Well, actually, do you want to do it because I got it wrong last time? I don't want to get it wrong again. So.
Okay, so um, basically what it is that one of your infantry units can start to raise a banner, and each one can do it on a different objective, and they raise the banner at the start of the next command phase. So you've got to survive an entire battle round of raising this banner up. But once the banner's raised, that remains in your control until your opponent can then take the objective back from you. So that you can actually move off the objectives. Not that you'd
Yeah.
ever actually move off the objectives, because that's
Yeah.
the whole point of the primary mission.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to move off the objective, then
You could
then
go do it. So one
yeah.
unit could go do it on. You could only have two raising banners, and they could get all the objectives. The only problem I say this is, and it's really key. This is what I was saying back at the beginning, that you got to know when things happen and when phases and when actions complete and stuff, because that has a whole turn to go through for your opponent to muck it up for you. And so, if you take it, you've got to know that not only can you get the infantry unit to that objective, that they can hold that objective for the whole turn, and that they are not going to lose by somebody else coming to combat or whatever with them and taking it back from them, because all they need to do is take the objective. So if you're thinking you're going to do that with just infantry guard squad, or cultists or something like that, and your opponent's got loads of shooting, so just forget it. Like they're not going to compete that action. And then similarly, if you're playing against a heavy close combat army and your infantry units aren't that durable, again, like a guard or cultists or something, then again expect that they're going to get charged because they're suddenly incredibly valuable because they're holding objectives and they're scoring two sets of mission points, and your opponent's going to go for them. So or conversely, if you're playing 30 plague bearers or whatever, 20 plague marines or rubrics or something like that, yeah, you probably are going to hold that, and it probably is a thing that's worth taking.
One thing to say is you can score this at the end of the game as well. So if you're going second, you can quickly run through all the objectives at the end of the game.
And your opponent can't take it off you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that end turn is so weird because you're
No, I think if you go second, it's a little bit of a swingy one.
yeah.
There's a couple of them where you can, instead of having to survive a battle round, you don't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you go first, you
You
scored your
don't get that, yeah.
primaries. You don't get it. What you're doing, you just play your turn out. Like there's stuff, they're not scoring any points. It's weird. But anyway, I'm sure there'll be some fun stuff that comes out of it. That's probably
Um,
for another video though. Investigate sites. I think
so I
is
would say we raise the banners, even if you just stay on two objectives, like your own two objectives. If you
yeah,
get those banners up and you keep them up, that's 10 points.
yeah, yeah. And if you do three, you're
That's
going to
10
max it.
points.
Yeah, and you've got a
So
chance to cock it up and catch it up again on other places. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
good one. It'll be a staple pick.
yeah.
Staple pick. I
But
think
don't
that's
take it if you've only got one or two infantry units, because
oh yeah.
your opponent will just literally kill your infantry units. Or the same, if you can see your opponent's done that and he's got 3 squads of infantry, so well, I'll just kill them.
Yeah.
Right now,
Do you
you
know
can't score it.
what I can see happening is people going, right, something like Poxwalkers with Cloud of Fly strat. It's like you just think that's amazing. You're like, okay, well, I'll put them on the banner, I'll put them on the objective. Of course, do Cloud of Flies, do my action, raise the banner, go on to the next one, and it makes total sense. It's great. But then if you're playing one or two squads of Poxwalkers because you really want to be taking other things, demon engines or whatever, then your opponent goes, okay, I just have to kill those 2 infantry units, and then you can't score any of your points. Like, yeah, it's like, okay, I'm going to throw everything at them. So I'm going to shoot one, and I'm just going to charge with anything I've got into the second. So yeah, no, you could be careful. Like if you're just playing massive infantry, then great. But you've got 2 units; they will be targets on their backs massively.
Yeah, and obviously the raise the banners works more when there's more objectives.
Mm-hmm.
You just got more you can score. So some
Easily.
some missions there's 4, some there's up to 6. So
Yep.
it's definite pick when there's 6.
Yep.
Next one is deploy scramblers. Now this is really, really, really easy to score, but you can only ever max out at 10 points. I think that's probably all there is to say about this. So
It's
you've got it.
infantry units again, though. You've got to be careful about that. And also, you do have to get into their objective. I mean, the one thing I would say this is, again, a lot of these will make you think, oh, well, strategic reserves or deep strike units. I'll just land in their deployment zone and I'll get the scrambler out. And it's like, yeah, but if they they counter, if you're thinking you're going to do that, and you've got something in deep strike, and they just counter by deep strike zoning, which everyone's going to get really good at, as I've said, then all of a sudden you're not being able to do that. You're not being able to do that in turn 3. You bring the guys in turn 3, they don't move. Then turn 4, you're trying to get into that objective, and then trying to do that action. It's like you're running a risk there.
Yeah.
It's the game plan never goes as you think it is.
Yeah.
There's always someone that has something to scupper it. So just be careful about that.
So we should probably say it. So you've got to you do one action in your deployment zone, one in the middle of the board, and one in your enemy's deployment zone, and it's done on your same turn. So you can just drop your reserves in and just do it.
Yeah, and it's just again, it's infantry. Just remember, if you're playing 10 squads of infantry, then fine. You're playing 1 or 2. You got a shield captain or somebody you think you're going to drop in and just do that. Just be careful. It's easy to.
Okay, next one, investigate sites, and this is a definite do not pick one. So infantry, again, as always, you've got to be within 6 of the middle of the battlefield. But the key thing here is that your opponent can deny it. So if your opponent has any models within 6 in the middle of the battlefield, you can't start performing this action. So it's actually a really easy one for your opponent to start denying, because 6-inch radius, you're talking about 12 inches, aren't you?
Yeah. I took this in my first mission thinking, one of the first games I played thinking, oh, this is great, right? So I was playing Poxmongers and Defilers and Plague Burst Callers, and I thought, I'm going to sit in the middle of the board with tons of demon engines. They don't want to come near because they're amazing in combat, and I'm just literally going to physically block out the center of the board. That was the plan. And I thought, well, then I'll take investigate sites, because I'll just sit there from turn 1 and he won't be able to get near me. And in my mind that was going to work perfectly, and they get onto the board and then there's terrain and we're playing Nova Elves because whatever, that's fairly standard terrain, and I was like, oh, I can't quite get there, I can't quite block out that bit. And all you would have to do, I was playing Vic, and all he did is just move his Blade Guard veterans into the behind the wall. I can't see them, I can't shoot them, I can't attack them, and he just needs to move there. He doesn't need to do anything because of the way the time, the phasing when it's scored. He just needs to move there, and I'm like, oh, I didn't score that turn, oh, I didn't score that turn, oh, I didn't score that turn. Thankfully I scored most other turns, but that was just a complete dud of a thing to take. So yeah, I just can't. I just wouldn't risk it. Maybe if your opponent's playing like a completely immobile gun line, but it used to be
no one's playing those in 9th.
Well, it used to be immobile because you didn't want to move your tanks because you suffer -1 to hit. But now, like, you can move your tanks. So a gun line that consists of tanks and stuff is going to move to you, and it just needs to step onto the objective and it scores the points. And again, it's the kind of thing where your opponent's mindset is always going to be, how do I stop my opponent scoring? So they'll look at that and go, oh, so I just need to move a model in there and you don't score any points. Well, that's my objective now. You've given me a tertiary objective, which is to move a model into the middle of the board every turn, and I stop you scoring like that. You've got to look at it like that.
Yep. Next one to talk about, which is also, it is kind of trying to win the award for the most terrible, but I think it's still going between investigate sites and cut off the head, is teleport homers. Because teleport homers is very bad, isn't it?
I think it's worse. You got to do it in their deployment zone.
Yeah. So you get 4 points.
Yeah.
So you have to get an infantry character. It can be a character, to be fair. So you have to get them into your opponent's deployment zone and then stand there for an entire battle round. So you're not allowed to shoot or do anything. You just have to stand there and do an action.
If your opponent is playing a rush in your face army, it's a terrible list, but just say 7 or 8 rhinos with berserkers in it, for example, and they're all going to run at your face, then they're going to be leaving their deployment zone, and then you would take this with line breaker and put a bunch of stuff in strategic reserve, just come out and score your max points on 2 secondaries. There's an example where it could work, to counter your opponent who's going to be running into your deployment zone, and they're not going to want to send a unit all the way back just to deal with one character, and you could come at anyone on the board, so they come back one side, you go back the other side. There's possible times.
There's play like a Colexus assassin. I think is probably the one thing which would be reasonably okay at this. Drop a Colexus in at the back of the board and score it.
If your opponent isn't deep strike zoning, because they don't have a list that allows them to do that, or it's not what they want to do for their game plan. Yeah, because it really cocks them up. They've got to go back and deal with it. It's a frustrating thing to deal with. They've got to put enough into it.
Yeah.
And if you're taking line break or something, possibly I can see it. So it's a medium case, like situational, but could be good in the right situation.
But we still hate it.
I'm actually liking it more. I started talking about it, but no, initially, yes, it's not.
But that's the thing. The more we play these, the more we'll actually come up with different ratings for all these.
Yeah, and it's dependent on the list. It's entirely dependent on the list.
Okay, so next one to talk about are Warpcraft. I'll let you talk about these because this is more your thing.
Yeah, I first read them, thought they're terrible, then decided that Cycle Ritual was the best thing ever, and I was going to make every list around it. Then talked to you and thought, actually, it's not so great, but I've had really good experiences with it, so I've only got good things to go on. I haven't been shut out, and basically, because they all require you to do a psychic action, which is basically a psychic test. I mean, the psychic test costs like a 3 or a 4, so it's super easy. And if you're taking stuff like Thousand Suns, Lord of Change, or something, anything where you get plus to cast, and particularly like +2 to cast, then I mean it's a guaranteed cast, but also what it means is very unlikely to be denied. Because the easiest argument anyone can have back to this is to say, well, your opponent could just deny it. Now, if I play a lot of psychic, so I am used to my psychic powers being denied, but it is not that often. I mean, and I've tried to deny powers a lot. Like, yes, once a game, or once every 2 games, or sometimes you go on a little bit of a streak and do it a couple of times, but it's unlikely to happen. And I think there's enough redundancy in some of these to make them worthwhile. If your opponent has a deny stratagem, like a World Eaters 4+ deny stratagem, then yeah, you are risking it. I would say the fact that now you can't re-roll everything, and I believe that means you can't re-roll like the 4+ and that stratagem, that makes it incredibly less likely. I mean, still it's a 50-50 obviously whether they're gonna do it, whereas before it was like, I don't know the ratio, I think it's like 70% chance of it happening or something. It makes it good. So we'll go through each one specifically, but essentially you're trying to get a character in a location and cast a psychic power
Okay.
is essentially what you're trying to do.
Um, so before we start, we'll quickly touch on a Whore the Witch, basically killing psychers.
Yeah.
If you don't have any of your own,
Yeah,
it's an
this is a
auto
different one
take.
to what I've just talked about. So this is one that's a little bit different. It's yeah, if your opponent is playing
We can
psychers,
come
then
back to that one then
yeah,
if you want.
let's come back to that because I've
Yeah,
just
okay.
talked
So
about this
let's
one.
talk about Pierce the Veil to start
Yep,
with.
yep,
So this is a very interesting one actually, and I think it's situationally quite good depending on what map you're playing. So you have
yeah,
to
definitely.
get within 6 inches of your opponent's battlefield edge, which is different than the deployment zone, and that's really important.
Yep,
Um, and more than 6 away from your opponent, and then you just have to cast a psychic power.
yep. So strategic reserves.
So
That's what.
it's basically just dropping things in reserves, or
Yeah.
if you've got a way of teleporting things around the board, it's fantastic for that.
Thousand Suns, Cult of Duplicity, Terminator Sorcerers, and then just Rubric Marines. So what would happen is that one squad of Rubric Marines would start in the Risen Rubricite, which is basically start like Nuglings do outside the deployment zone. So they could just start their turn one and then immediately do that. If you get first turn, they can literally do that turn one. They appear in that deployment, in that battlefield edge, outside the deployment zone, and they just immediately cast it. It's an easy points. Like, done deal. And because when you're coming out of strategic reserve, you can pick where you're going to be. You just make sure you're outside the die range. You just appear wherever you want to appear, more than the denied distance, and you're fine. So that would be a good example. Cult of Duplicity, obviously, because that means later in the game you can re-deep strike them. It's a psychic
Yeah.
power they cast. So one would cast it on them, and they re-deep strike, and they cast. Then they would the unit that re-deep strike would then be cast the model. Dark Matter Crystal lets you do it as well. You know,
I mean,
it's a
I
great
think
one.
there's a
I
lot of
can't
good things, and
take it.
particularly if you're a really tanky psyker, it's not a bad one to take.
Scarab Occult Terminators.
I think the really funny part of it though is when your battlefield edge doesn't tie up with your deployment zone.
Yeah,
So
the old Vanguard one, for
yeah, so
example.
if you've got Vanguard deployment and you've got the table quarters,
Yeah,
well, actually your
search and destroy. What used
so
to be
the
search and
long
destroy.
table edge is your deployment zone. So actually, you can just run across, particularly in table quarters. Your opponent's actually nowhere near their own battlefield edge, so you can
Yeah,
just run a unit across there and start doing that turn one.
and some of those where the objectives are and stuff. There's no reason for them to be there either. Like they're not going to be screening there. They're not going to be a threat from you coming in. That there's no
Yeah,
objectives down there. There's nothing for you to do there. So it's kind of like no man's land off to the side that doesn't really get played on in a normal game. And all of a sudden you've got a unit there. I'm gonna have to pull a unit back to it. Or I'm gonna have to try and get into range to shoot a weapon and enough weapons to kill it because it's a unit. And I got to kill all of them because otherwise they can just do it. And if it's a character, I can't even shoot it unless it's if it's got
yeah,
a unit around it. So yeah, it can be really good. I really think that on situationally could be excellent, but not every game.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, next
so
one to talk about is psychic ritual, which is one that you absolutely
yeah,
loved, which was essentially you have to put a psychic in within 6 inches in the middle of the board, and then you cast a power.
yeah,
Now, there's a bit of a gamble because you've got to cast the power 3 times on the same psyker,
or you score nothing.
or you score nothing. So
And
it's
if
a
it was,
really big gamble. And bearing in mind, there's lots of ways to interact with that character. So if the
Yeah.
opponent's got snipers, it's a bad idea. If
Yeah.
your opponent's got multiple ways to deny, such as stratagems, deny them, which bearing in mind you're going to be right in the middle of the board, so they're going
Mm.
to have a lot of chances to be within deny range. Again, it's a really bad idea. If your opponent's got a heavy melee army, which is going to be dominating the middle of the board, all they have to do is run up and whack you with a thunderhammer, and that's going to
Mm.
ruin your day as well.
Yeah.
So um, there's a lot of reasons why actually, although, if you've got enough protection around your character and there's a big line of sight blocker, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of reasons why this isn't such a good one to take.
If it wasn't one character and it was any characters to do it 3 times, then it'd be absolutely excellent. Yeah, it really would be. I would say a lot of people would take it because you have the redundancy if it goes wrong. At the moment, because one character has to have done it 3 times. So what that means is you could do it 2 turns, and then that character could die, and then another character could do it, but he has to do it every turn until the end of the game. So you literally get one chance to fail it. Well, you get 2 chances to fail it, or you could lose that character and start it again with a new character. But you can't start it again with like a third character because there isn't enough turns for that to
Mm.
happen. So it's I took it again. Poxmonger's list: 3 Plague Callers, 3 Defilers, and a Demon Prince sat in the middle with giving auras out and casting it. He's not going to die. He's a character. He's surrounded by objectives. He's got 8 wounds. He's got 3 up, 5 up. And a feel up, no pain. So in that situation, it's a great thing to take. Yes, he can be denied. That's the loss there. But I was thinking if you're playing a Lord of Change with +2 to cast and a 3+ invulnerable save, like that's might as well
But then
doing
again,
stuff.
you've taken out your entire Lord of Change from the game in terms of his psychic abilities.
Yeah, but you only cast 2 powers. That's like it's not. I know it's great,
But
but
like if you've
mm,
bought like a 200-point psychic to the game, or I don't know how much a Lord of Change costs, but if
yeah,
you
it's
bought,
270 now. It's
but
ridiculous.
you're taking him out from the game
Yeah,
just to do this. So I mean,
yeah.
it's still a valuable thing to do, but
It's max score, so yeah. But
yeah,
no, I get it. I do. Well, it's actually not even max score. It's 4 points, isn't it? And it's 15 points. Yes, max score.
yeah,
Yeah. No, I know.
it's
I mean,
risky.
yeah. For me, I was thinking a Terminator Sorcerer for 1,000 Suns with +1 to cast, or maybe +2 to cast. Yeah, it is risky, but it could be good. If your opponent's got no deny and they're going to play, a bit all over the shop, or they've got for things they want to do, then again, it's a situation it could be quite good. The last one then is mental interrogation. I don't think this one's good. I can see why if you're playing like all 1,000 Suns and you've got loads of people that could do it, then fair enough. But like you've got to be within 18 inches of a character. How many characters your opponent got, and you've got to not kill that character so you can do it multiple times.
Yeah, so this is my issue with it as well, is that again, it gives your opponent so much control over how you're going to approach the secondary. Because if I know you've got to get within range of my characters, unless I've got really aggressive characters, I just hold them back, which means that you've got to
Yeah,
overextend your characters,
yeah. It's
which is
the
really
outplay.
bad. Or
Yeah.
you've been playing against Lewis and he's put all of his characters in reserve anyway.
Mm.
Then you suddenly you're not getting many points from that at all.
I would definitely string my opponent through a ringer on that. I'd like put my character in a place where it's like you can do it, but you got to come into this kill zone, and just take them away from objectives, because they can't then just put one psyker on his own out in the middle of nowhere. It's normally a character. He needs a accompanying unit. It can't just be a shitty unit that's going to die quickly. It's got to be something with a bit more power to it, which means it's probably more expensive. He's probably got to move a chunk of his army to support the ability to score this. So if I put all my characters over on one side of the board, it's like, oh, okay, I've got to move off all the objectives to a place on the board that I don't want to be to try and score this objective. So I keep saying this: if your opponent can manipulate you through the choices that you made on your secondaries, they're probably not good secondaries,
Yeah.
or they'll do you really well. Because generally you're taking them for a reason, you think they're good and you can work out, and you'll do really well at early tables, and then you come up to game 4 to game 5 in the tournament, and you'll start playing against some really really good players, and they will just string you through it. This is what I'm saying, that was the wheat for the chaff, because it's so obvious for good players to do that, and
Yeah.
you'll think it's great up until that point. It's always worked for me. I've crushed people taking this every time. Oh, what? Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. So they're the psychic ones. They're very situational, and they generally give your opponent quite a lot of opportunities to interact.
Mm.
I think
It,
the anti-psycho one, let's quickly touch on, Abhor the Witch.
Borderwitch, yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's only if you don't have psychers in your own army. I think against Grey Knights or Thousand Suns, it's an auto include because you basically get 3 points per psychic unit you kill,
Yeah,
or if you kill a character, it's 5 points.
yeah.
So it's utterly ridiculously
If you're
good.
playing Tau or Necrons and you're playing against Thousand Suns or Grey Knights, you take it. You just take it. I can't see any reason you wouldn't. I really cannot see how you would not
Yeah.
take that in either of those matchups.
I'd say the only time you don't take this against a psychic heavy army is Eldar, because you've got to be very careful about armies, particularly on jet bikes and things like that, where they can actually just keep their distance. Their characters, they're much easier to hide. And it may be that you just
You
don't
still
get
get
near those.
3 points. Oh
Yeah,
no, yeah, because they're not all psychers. Yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah. So Thousand Sons of Grey Knights because every unit is a psyker, whereas with
yeah.
Eldar there'll
Well, it
be a
was Eldar.
complete
If you're
list of them.
chasing down some crazy little guys on jet
Yeah,
bikes, you
it
may actually be in for a rough ride on that one.
redundancy is absolutely key with this as well, because if you look at it's like the assassinate or something like that. If you look at them and they've got 4 or 5 individual jet bike farseers or warlocks or however they're going to play it, just don't do it, because you've got to kill what 3 units. No, you got to kill 3 of those 5 units, and it's like, yeah, I know that's doable. And if you table your opponent, obviously you're going to do it. But the match doesn't go well, and your opponent just decides to just back off and hide one of those because it's a jet bike and it flies a million miles. You aren't scoring it. So it just, that's why for Grey Knights and for Thousand Suns, it's an obvious one, because it's unlikely that every single model in that army will be Psyker. So every time you kill a model, you're getting points. But if it's not like that, and if they don't have a significant redundancy, then don't risk it, because your opponent then has control.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. We've done
Right.
these ones.
Yeah, we're smashing through these. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the mission specific ones. And there's actually some really nice little ones in here, actually.
Mm.
So priority targets. This is
Yeah.
this is very good. And this is where you both you both pick a priority objective. So if you control your own objective, which is in your own deployment zone, you get 3 points, and it's just at the end of your turn. So it's a complete give me.
Yeah.
So if you control your own objective for 5 turns, you get 15 points. That's without extending yourself or doing anything else. If you just control it,
Yeah.
to the end of the turn, it's perfect. If you control your opponent's one as well, which is in their deployment zone, which is probably going to be quite hard to do. But again, if you're an aggressive assault army, if you can push them back even just to the end of your turn, then you're scoring 5 points a turn.
If you're playing a skew list that's designed to take objectives, and if you've built a list that you're like, okay, I only take objectives, and this comes back to why I think that Nurgling list is,
Mm.
I mean, I'll see how it plays out, but I think it's got to be one of the best lists out there at the moment, because you would take domination, so that you're scoring points. You'll take this one, so you're scoring points, and you're maxing your primary. And at the same time as you're doing all those things, you're countering your opponent's primary. On paper, and I appreciate that the games don't play out on paper, but on paper, that is an unwinnable. That is a win condition that I don't think can be beat unless you can get table. And then if you're playing something like 97 Nurglings or whatever, they're not going to kill that in 5 turns, or certainly not going to kill it in 3 turns. And post turn 3, they can't score enough to catch up on the loss. So it starts when you start putting these bits and pieces together, you start realizing the game is very, very different. You're thinking about what you can achieve in 3 turns, what you can deny your opponent in 3 turns, and how you can maximize that by doing the same things. And very quickly, the maths of that and the list building exercise will determine the victory or not. And
Yeah.
then dice will have effect, but I think
So,
that's going to be the main thing.
so I think this one's almost an auto take priority target, regardless of your army, because you just hold your own objective.
Yeah, and I must admit, we've just been through all those secondaries, right? We said there was probably 3 or 4 in there, and you can see from the document when you guys have a look at it, it's probably 3 or 4 in there that are fairly obvious ones that you're going to take, and a bunch of situational ones. So, if you're playing this mission, you're probably going to want to take that. And if you haven't got an army that can do that successfully, that mission, then you probably haven't got a very good army, or you've got a
If you
very
can't
skew
hold your
army.
own objective in your own deployment zone,
Yeah, and if you
yeah,
don't think there's any chance of you getting your opponents for at least 1 turn or maybe 2,
yeah,
then you're probably not. Especially on one of the objectives where it's only like 4 objectives. It's like, how are you going to get the whole
how are you going to
war?
get hold?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, if you can't even have your own
yeah,
objective, how are you going to get
exactly.
hold?
Yeah, and definitely you can't get hold 2. And how are you getting hold more? Because you've got to get all 3, right? Or you've got to stop your opponent scoring them. So you've got to be in there. It's just you have to be thinking you're going to score that. But then I guess the thing is, every list, everybody has to think that. So it's who's going to be better at it. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out. This is all
Yeah.
theory at the moment.
Okay, so the scouring. I think this one's quite good actually. So this is an action that you can do, and as many units as as you want can start doing this as long as they're in range of different objectives. And you don't have to be infantry to do this, by the way. So
Like swarm, maybe like Nurglings. I don't
yeah.
know. Starting on all the objectives and doing this turn one.
So you only need to scan 4 objectives to get maximum points in this. So this is really good.
Yeah,
Um,
but they all have to be different. That's the
they
key.
all
You have
have
to
to be
have the same
different.
one every time. So if
And
you're
you,
playing on a map with 4 objectives, you have to go and scan every objective if you want to max score it.
yeah. And I mean, I was playing against Simon last night and he took this and I completely null deployed him and he was going first. So he just ran forward onto all the objectives turn 1 and just started scanning them all. So I had to start killing those units as a priority.
Yeah, max score, don't you?
Because I thought I was doing really well up until that point. It's like, well, I'll just scan all the objectives then since you've decided to hide.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good one, and the thing is, I think a lot of the objectives now, it depends on the mission. Oh, well, on this mission, because it's a mission-specific one, the objectives are in no man's land.
Yeah, it's all in the middle, so it's
So,
really quite easy to get.
yeah, as I said, like you literally could start on all of those objectives and take them all turn one, move out and just if you get turn one, basically you can max score this. So the thing
You
is,
still got to survive to your next turn. So
yeah,
the other interesting thing about it is that you can score it last turn if you go second. So like if you've practically tabled your opponent, you just run forward onto all the objectives quickly and score them.
yeah. I guess the thing is you don't know whether you're going first or second when you pick it. You just got to know that you can.
But it's just a nice one to set if you're going second. If you can set yourself up for end game to quickly run onto the objectives, your opponent doesn't get a chance to stop you doing it.
Yep. And you know you should be there anyway because then if you manage to take if you manage to get turn one onto all 4 objectives and hold all 4 objectives to your next turn, then not only do you max score your scouring, but you also max deny your opponent. So that first turn you score 15 points. No, sorry, you would
Well,
score.
at the start of your second turn, yeah, you score 15 points.
The second time you score 15 points, but you also score your
15 points.
15 points for your primary as well.
Yeah.
And your opponent will score 0, and that's a great start. So if they're going right, okay, it's my turn 1. Sorry, it's my turn 2 now. I'm 30 points down. No, I'm 45 points down. I got to pull something out of the bag to bring it back.
Yeah, because they won't score anything if you're sitting on all.
They won't score anything, and you'll score max on 2. And if you've got domination as well, and you score, a good chunk of points for that. So, and then the mentality behind starting turn 2 and being, oh man, my opponent's got like 50 and I got 0. It's like that plays people. A lot of players will make a lot of mistakes off the back. They feel like they're on the back foot. They feel like they have to overcommit, take high risk, high reward plays to try and win the game back. It is one of the hardest things about Warhammer, playing from behind and not just going all out and hoping for luck. Because you just feel like that's what you got. You feel like, well, I hope the dice go well, and I hope I just insta kill that and make all my saves, and that way I can win the game. There's only the absolute top echelons of players who can appreciate that they are far behind, but there's still enough turns for them to bring it back and navigate that without overcommitting, without pushing themselves to a limit. It's mental is a huge part of Ninth Edition.
Yeah. And I think another nice thing for that is you could have things like scouts on there. You could have like your infiltrating battle suits, all that stuff.
Yeah. Nurglings.
So the next one, retrieval mission, minimize losses. You're going to love this one as well. So as effectively, you get points depending on how much of your units are left.
Yeah, I think this is bad, if I'm honest.
Interestingly, though, it's units not so you could have one model from each unit left, and you'd still score max points.
Yeah, but then that's down to your opponent to decide what they leave and what they don't, and it just comes back to they'll just overcommit. It's got the problem, the Achilles heel of too many of these missions is that your opponent controls how you score that one, not you.
Yeah, so I mean, the only time you'd take this is if you were up against Lewis's Nurgle list and you brought Imperial Knights. So you're not actually going to interact with them. So you're gonna double up. I think if you're going to do this one, you take while we stand, we fight with it. So you double up on, right, he's not going to kill me. He can't kill me. Therefore, I take the 3 most expensive units are going to be scoring me 15 points. And for the retrieval mission, I'm going to finish with over 75% of my forces. So I'll score another 15 points.
Yep. And you'll score 0 points in the primary.
And you'll still lose the game, yeah.
But no, exactly. There'll be, again, situational possibly. I'm not going to rule it out. There'll be times, there's so many different combinations of lists and matchups and everything, but I I don't see it being a one that's going to be a go-to. You're going to have your set three, so that it doesn't matter what list you've got. You're going to once you play, sorry, what mission you're playing, you have your secondaries ready to go. And if you play this mission, you'll be like, oh well, I don't take that secondary, so I'll go back to my default three
Yeah,
secondaries or my
yeah.
situational
It's
matchup secondary.
very. I mean, honestly, it's probably an orange rather than a yellow one. To be honest, I think I've been a bit too kind to it.
Yeah, it's situational hard, I'd say.
Yeah. Next one to talk about is Scorched Earth.
Raise. I love raise missions.
I mean, you know, the whole raise thing is basically you remove an objective from the table,
I
which
think
can
it's
really mess
great.
up your opponent.
It's the thing is it just turns the game on its head. Like, you're always trying to hold one or kill one or whatever, and this is like you're trying to destroy one. That means it doesn't happen. So, if this was the only mission in the game, if you're playing like a one game and you're playing Scorched Earth and you can list tailor to it, then you're just going to be building to eradicate the objectives as soon as you can. Now you won't be because you're playing a tournament, playing other missions. You won't be able to skew that hard, but it's fun. I love the race missions. I think they're great.
But it's quite interesting actually that you know, if you raise too many of your objectives in this mission, you're not going to score that many points.
No, I know. But if you've got a way to raise your opponent's one, so I don't know again, but if you could like fly a Helldrake onto it like turn one and then raise the one in their, raise the two in their deployment zone and they're playing a gun line, it's like, what are you going to do? Because literally the only thing that matters in this game is holding objectives. The two that you were expecting to hold and score reasonable good points on are disappeared, which means you can now only win the game by holding the objectives in my deployment zone. And are you a fast moving army? No. If someone's playing
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't raise them if your
bastards.
opponent's in range of them.
Yeah, no, but if you can get in there and do it, like, because you still have you when do you raise it at the end of their turn?
As the end of the turn. So basically, you start at the start. No, sorry, you start at the start of your turn, providing that there's no enemies in range of it,
Yeah.
and then it happens at the end of the turn. At the end of your turn.
Okay. I was thinking you could kill them during your turn and then take it at the end. Yeah. Okay. But
So you've only got to hold it for the turn, but they've got to start with no models within range of it.
yeah. But then if it's the second that they cock up and don't have any models, so say they leave, I used to play a lot of Derrideers, right? And I would just put one Derrideer on an objective and just sit there and hold it. And then if I die, maybe I'll chuck some colors onto it the following turn or whatever. So if you've got Derrideer on it and then you just manage to kill that Derrideer and then you can fly a Helldrake over and sit on it.
Yeah, so if they didn't replace anything on top of that objective, then you just whisk it, you just jump over there and just immediately
Yeah.
raise it.
But now this is what I'm saying. Weak for the chaff sort of idea is that a good player will go, okay, well, I don't know because you'll be taking raise, but you look at that and go, well, I'm going to skew to that because I can see that he's going to want to do this, right? He's going to have one big unit like, I don't know, like the possessed bomb or something. I don't know, whatever's good in ninth edition, running at my face. He's going to try and hold his backfield with a couple of little infantry squads or whatever because his main thing is to try and get at me. I'm like, okay, well, if I can clear that zone, as in the models that have a distance reach to be able to get back to that objective, and I can raise that objective and I just throw a couple of models in strategic reserve or do whatever to be able to do it, I throw the whole game plan out because now it's really difficult for them to get those hold more because I've destroyed their ability to do it. So I'm super situational conversation at the moment, but there'll be times where you'll realize that actually could work as a game plan, and it's just one of those things that you're just going to have to have this big library of tactics, like a chess player does.
Yeah,
Lots of, they move here, I do that. If they do this, I'll pull out this maneuver. And you just look at their list and look at how you think they'll end up deploying, what they think they're going to end up taking against you, and you'll be like, I'm going to go for raise here because I could just screw their primaries over massively as well as score my own secondaries.
I mean, raise is part of the primary mission anyway. You can raise regardless, but you score points if you choose the secondary
Yeah,
raise.
yeah, yeah, true.
Okay. So battle lines is the next one to talk about. Vital ground. So essentially, there's two objectives in the middle, and there's one in your enemy's deployment zone. And if
Mm-hmm.
you score two for each objective you hold in the middle of the board, and you score three if you hold your opponent's one as well. So up to 7 a turn. So this would be perfect for like your Nurgling list, for example. And
Aren't
you've got
they
to
all?
hold it to your next turn.
Aren't
So
they all?
it's just board control armies. It's perfect for.
Yeah, well, a lot of them are. That's why I kind of went down there. It's like you need to have, I mean, it doesn't have to be legs as well, like Risen Rubricite, units of 10, 15, 20, Cult of Duplicity, so you can get around things that you can do to make sure you just instantly have board control. And I mean, instantly, like turn one, you're putting that pressure on. You start racking up the points and you start causing them to lose their primaries because you've got the board. And then you're scoring, maximum points on things like Vital Ground. It's like, it's so hard to come back from that. And what, you're killing army, you're going to kill me by turn 3, turn 4, and then you're not going to still have caught up. So I think it's got a lot of play.
Yeah.
Uh,
The next one is sweep and clear, direct assault. So you've got to either hold, this is just holding to the end of your turn, not to your opponent's turn. So you've got to hold the central objective, and you get 3 points. And if you control your opponent's objective as well, you can get 5 points. So it's really good. I guess it's this, if you're an aggressive army like Blood Angels, you're going to be at least in the middle of the board. You're hopefully going to be hiding behind a big line of sight blocker in the middle. You're likely to score this each turn for 3 points.
Yeah, and you do it, and your opponent does not have much of an ability to counter this because they can still pile in and fight and consolidate and get into position. They have a few ways of doing things, but for the most part, you're gonna run on there in your turn, you're gonna score at the end of your turn, and your opponent can't react. So this is what I was saying right at the beginning, where it's like, notice when these things are scored: your turn, your opponent's turn, your
Yeah,
command phase.
there's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, some of these, if they were just worded slightly different, said that was scored in your command phase, for example, or some of the last
It'd
ones
be
we were
much
talking
harder
about,
all of a sudden. Yeah,
yeah, it would just be a completely different thing. The minute wording is so important. Like same with the psychic rituals and stuff like that. It's like one character has to do it. If you didn't say one character, said any character, it makes it so much more different. So just make sure you properly read the rules and
yeah,
understand them, and what your opponent's trying to do, because that is how you counter it. You don't
yeah,
want any gotchas. You do
yeah.
not want gotchas.
All right. Next is vital intelligence, data intercept. So this is where well, one model can start the data intercept, and he has to be in range of an objective and survive to the next turn.
Hmm.
And then, depending on how many objectives you have in your next command phase, that's how many points you get.
Yeah.
So, for Lewis's Nurgling list, which unsurprisingly is actually quite good, this would be amazing because he hides one little character at the back of the board near his home objective.
Yeah.
He starts a little data intercept, and then depending on how many objectives he's got next turn, that's how many points he gets. So he's going to get like 4 or 5 points a turn potentially.
Yeah, there's 6 objectives on this one as well. So yeah, I mean, you would expect turn 1 to get 5. So
Yeah. And the last one we're going to talk about is surround and destroy. Surround them. So this one is actually quite difficult because you've got to hold both your own objectives and your opponent's objective in their
yeah,
deployment zone until the next command phase. I mean, obviously there is going to be durable armies who are going to be doing this. And so you score 4 points if you do that. And if you control all 4 of the objectives in both your opponent's zones and your zones, then you can score 8 points. So if you think I'm just going to be all over my opponent,
and
then
you're
yeah,
taking domination, and that's just your
you're
list.
taking
Yeah.
domination, surround and destroy them.
It just comes back to the fact that these secondaries, for the mission specific secondaries, they double down on the primaries for most part. I mean, I know there's the one about how many units you got left at the end of the game, but other than that, they're all like, do you hold all the objectives? And it's like, yeah, I'm holding all the objectives. It's like, well, then you get loads of extra points. It's like, my primaries are holding the objectives. So the only thing that matters in the game is primaries and secondaries. And my primaries is, do I hold all the objectives? And my secondaries is, do I hold all the objectives? So the only thing that matters is I hold all the objectives.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
it is. But
just think about that when
there's
you're building
different
your list.
ways of doing it, though.
Just think about that when you're building your list.
Yeah,
Because it used to be that would be great, but you also had to get kills. And if your opponent could just get more kills than you, then they could kill you or get all the kills and then get the objectives later in the game. And there was enough turns to do it. But I cannot stress enough: 5 turns. All you need to do is hold more of your opponent's objectives for 3 turns, and you can take a perfect, whatever list you're playing against. It's almost irrelevant what you're playing against. You can take a perfect combination of secondaries, mission-specific secondaries, obviously from the main set of pack, and primaries, that by holding all the objectives, you're going to max score all of them. That's why I say something like the Nurglius. If you can hold for 3 turns and score max primaries and max secondaries, your opponent can't win. It doesn't matter like what happens after that, even if they table you after that, and it's irrelevant. So yeah, just be very considerate of that when you're writing lists. Just make sure you've got the ability to hold more objectives than your opponent and hold their objectives as well.
yeah. So the way I've thought about it is you want tough as nails things to hold your primary, so like your custodies or something like that, and then you just want like silly little guardsmen to run over and
Yeah,
steal your opponent's objectives. They're denying them points, and then
yeah,
your custodies
yeah,
are getting your own points basically.
yeah, definitely. I mean,
And
for
then if
me,
you really wanted to kill something, again, that denies your opponent, doesn't it?
yeah,
It doesn't score
absolutely.
you any points.
Yeah, I mean, this is why thinking about the timing is so important, because what you've just described there is you take big key things that have to sit on a objective for an entire turn, and you take throwaway units that just have to run out and either disrupt or do something. So they run at the beginning of your turn, they run, move, and obviously advance the stuff from one place of the board onto an objective. That means that at the start of your opponent's next turn, they don't hold that objective because you have more obsec bodies than they do on it. And then you've just diminished them by 5 or maybe even 10 points.
Yeah.
That unit dies. Next time you do it again. So that's why those units are really, really, really good. And at the same time, the units that have to sit and hold your objective for your entire turn are also really good. So it's objectives as objectives. So that's why, as I say, things like world killers, where you can stop an opponent scoring objectives or something like that, there must be some play in those kind of things, because they stop your opponents having an ability to score points, which otherwise they wouldn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very different sort of game. And yeah, it's the mission pack we've got at the moment. I think it's actually
Mm.
very interesting to play. That's why I spent all this time
Yeah,
coming up with these.
yeah,
I'm sure there's minor errors we've made in this, by the way. So please point them out to us, because we do.
yeah,
And we'll sit there and we'll edit it up and
yeah.
do it. Also, we've not seen the overrun mission yet. That's about the only one which we haven't seen. So I'll put that up as soon as I get the book properly. For
Yeah.
some reason, we haven't been set an official copy of it.
Okay. I mean, I honestly say this. I think they did this with the Eternal War at the beginning of 8th edition. Then they brought out the Maelstrom and chapter approved, and then obviously every chapter approved, they changed the missions. And then we were also playing ITC. Every time we switched a mission pack to a mission pack, the game became a different game. And I think, last edition it became a very different game quite quickly in a lot of formats, because then you had ETC format and you had Nova, and everyone had their own mission packs. And so every time you're playing, you'd see these different army lists
Yeah.
pop up, disappear. For this set of missions, we're going to see this now, I'd imagine, for a while, certainly into early next year, I'd imagine. And everyone's just going to be playing crazy skew lists to take advantage of what is a very unusual mission pack. And then I fully expect to see kill points come in a Maelstrom type pack,
Yeah,
early next year.
I think they will introduce killing eventually, but
Yeah, but and that will be a completely different game again. Maybe they'll just switch and it will all be kill and there'll be no objectives or something. But for now, it's list builders heaven, because there's no preset way of doing things. The meta's through the roof right now. No one's even been playing, so no one really has got an idea of what's good on the unit side, let alone what's actually good for playing missions. I think if you've got some smarts about you, and you're really interested in finding the ways to make things work, you could write lists that on paper just would never stack up, but on the missions just score so well. It's great. It's a really exciting time.
yeah. Right, I think that's it, isn't it, buddy?
Wow, that was a deep dive. I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, it's been one we've
Yeah,
been wanting to do for a while, but I thought it was
yeah.
important that we got a few games under our belt first.
Yeah. We've been talking about this video for weeks. I mean, since we had the book, obviously, for ages
Yeah,
now. But it was just, and also we're waiting for the mission pack to come out to wonder if they're bringing kill points. And then when we saw they weren't, it was like,
so that has not changed. Right, okay, let's do this.
funny that they did change some of the, like Slay the Warden. They changed some of them for the tournament pack, but not for any positive reason I can see.
Yeah. And just to say, we will, D6, we've always done all those more shenanigans videos, but I think that's something which realistically comes a bit later, once you've had a bit more play with the edition and people have
Yeah.
started to figure things out.
I think the conversation is more about the strategy
Yeah,
than it
this
is
is,
about tactics. I think we're into that area now, which is great. I mean, for me, that's always been the thing that I've enjoyed
yeah.
more. So, yeah, brilliant,
Okay.
excellent,
Right,
guys.
we'll see you in the next video. Take
See you
care,
later.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.